Welcome. I'm David the Good, creator of thesurvivalgardener.com and author of multiple books, including Compost Everything, The Good Guide to Extreme Composting, and Grow or Die, The Good Guide to Survival Gardening. Today we're going to focus on survival gardening. We don't have enough time to cover all the important things you need to know, but we're going to try and get you a good start. We're going to talk about tools, we'll talk about plant foraging, we will talk about how to fertilize without having to spend money, and I'm going to show you how to build a little easy garden bed in about half hour to 45 minutes worth of time. So let's get started and get wandering around. Wild plants are a treasure trove of nutrition and calories. Because they're not grown on commercial farms, they're picking up the nutrition of the soil and not being fertilized and sprayed with all kinds of bizarre chemicals. Hopefully. Obviously, if you're foraging from your neighbor's perfect lawn and you find a dandelion at the corner that somehow escaped the weed and feed, I'd probably skip it. But you'll have to remember that pesticides and herbicides are not the only toxins that you have to worry about. The plant world is very good at defending itself against being eaten. You think of deer, you think of insects, all kinds of things like to eat plants. A lot of life is based on plants. So it's good to know what you have. It's good to start identifying your plant families properly before you get too far into foraging. Just kind of start with the easy stuff. Don't just eat everything, don't taste everything first. Make sure you know what you have and then eat it. It's safe. I've never gotten sick except like 5 or 10 times from wild plant foraging. So, trust me.
That's not true. I think you've only really gotten sick like once.
Loofah.
That was, yeah.
In this little patch of weeds right here, there are multiple species that may be useful, edible, poisonous, or otherwise. I can identify 4 or 5 right now. This is Haitian basket vine, which is a tropical relative of pokeweed. If you're familiar with poke salad, those of you that live in the South and have tried poke salad, it's one of those southern classic delicacies that you have to prepare properly. It's a multiple boiling, change of water sort of a thing, or else death. Well, this is a relative. This one I don't believe is quite as toxic. When you take the young leaves on it and chop them and boil them, I've eaten them, they taste fine, and I didn't die. Right next to it is a member of the nightshade family. The nightshades are a very important family with a lot of great things in it. Tobacco, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants. Some of our favorite foods are nightshades, but some very deadly plants are also nightshades. I mean, just when you say nightshade, people go, oh, yeah, that doesn't sound good. This one, I have not been able to nail down the edibility on. However, I've been told by a local that his sister takes the fruits off it and boils them and drinks the water and says it's good for you. Well, I don't know. He was convinced that it was slightly toxic and maybe that his sister was a little bit crazy. I stay away from nightshades unless I know the nightshade and know for certain that it's safe. There are some very good ones. Little ground cherries, for example, are nightshade, but I'm gonna stay away from that one. Right here, this creeping vine, sometimes called balsam pear. This is bitter gourd, which is an Asian vegetable. This is a wild form of it. It has been said to be both anti-cancer and good for diabetes. You take the young leaves at the end, you nip them off, and you can stir fry them. They are bitter, so it's one of those things you want to mix into a mix. When the fruits are on it, they are a bright orange fruit when they're all the way ripe, and you can split it open and suck the sweet fruit off of the seeds themselves. The arils of the fruit are edible, but the skin of the fruit and the seeds are not. So once you know that, you can just go, my kids eat them all the time, but they spit the seeds out. And they plant many more in doing so. The green fruits are used as a vegetable in Asian cooking. I have chopped them up and eaten them, but I've kind of lost my taste for bitter vegetables over the last few months since I poisoned myself with a loofah. Anyhow, multiple things here. Down on the ground, there is a Bacano tree. Bacano tree is a Cecropia tree, Cecropia peltata, this one. This has multiple uses for it. You can make tea out of it. You can make great compost out of it because they're constantly dropping leaves. So if you plant one, it's a source of those browns for the compost pile all the time. They also have edible fruit, but you have to beat the fruit bats to it if you live in a climate like I do. Quite a few things here. One more plant. This is a member of the aster family with very pleasant aroma, and this is called broom locally by the natives because when you take a big bundle of it, you can twist it up, let it dry in the sun, and make yourself a real good broom. So, see all this usefulness right here, just within a couple of square yards? This is why it's important to learn your plant families and get out and start spotting things. Get yourself a couple of guidebooks and start looking around. Because if things get rough, you're gonna wanna know what you can eat, what's good for medicine, what's good for making a broom, you know, what's good for fiber. There's a lot of things out there in nature that are sitting around that people walk past every single day that if you know, you'll be fine. Because knowledge is power. And stay in school. If plants are the chemical weapons masters of nature, I would say fungi are nukes. You're likely to get yourself killed if you don't know what you're doing with mushrooms because there are so many varieties and many of them look somewhat different under different conditions, and there's a lot of them that look alike. Some of them are very deadly, some of them are very delicious, but it's the sort of thing that if you're interested in survival, you probably statistically lower your chances by foraging mushrooms on a regular basis. However, there are mushrooms that are safe and very good for you, as well as being a source of protein, interestingly. Here we have a couple of different species. This is a different species from these. Even though they look quite similar, this is a shelf fungi, like a turkey tail type. And this here looks to me like an oyster mushroom of some sort. I do not know my tropical mushrooms all that well. I learned my temperate species better than I learned tropical species, and I'm still learning here. So there's no way I'm gonna eat this, even if I do think it's a type of oyster, unless I know for sure. It's not a good idea. But if you learn a few varieties of edible mushrooms, learn ones that don't have dangerous toxic lookalikes, learn how to identify an edible puffball mushroom, learn how to identify morels, learn how to identify chanterelle mushrooms, and then start into the boletes. These are almost invariably mushrooms that have associations with tree roots. They usually grow near hardwoods and trees out in older forests. The field mushrooms that grow all by themselves are generally more likely to be toxic. But like anything with mushrooms, don't take my word for it. Learn well, learn from a local expert. Make sure you are very careful. Once you learn mushrooms though, boy, you are getting some seriously rich, delicious food on your table. Food that is so good money can't buy it. There are foraged mushrooms you cannot find in the stores. And they are so good. You can't even cultivate them yourself if you try. You have to go to the woods, find where they live with the tree roots, harvest them yourselves, bring them home, and you will have the best food on the planet. You just have to make sure you don't die afterwards. So, just a little caveat. Deciding what to grow is a bit of a challenge. You get all the seed catalogs in the mail, you look at them, you say, oh, I want to try this, oh, I want to try this, oh, I want to try this. And next thing you know, you're growing pocket melons and black peppers and purple carrots, and you're really not growing a survival garden. You're just having fun. You may be making all kinds of fun food, but it's not really a survival garden. I would say, here's how you plan a survival garden. First, calories. Plant calorie crops first. If it doesn't make a lot of calories, you might not want to put it in your garden, right? So make a smaller space for those beefsteak tomatoes that you love and make a larger space for potatoes. The thing you want is to survive, right? You don't necessarily want to have a nice time about it. Plant boring things with tons of calories that are very easy to grow. Staple crops from throughout history have kept people alive in tough situations. Calories first, calories first, calories first. It doesn't matter how cheap potatoes are in the store right now. You need to know how to grow potatoes because one day the store may not be open. Second, nutrition. People miss nutrition. If you're eating pork lard pies and potatoes every single day, you may end up with the Black Death, right? So you want to make sure that your body is healthy and you are meeting the mineral vitamin needs that will keep you going and keep you happy and keep you reloading cartridges without the shakes, you know? So you have a big bed of potatoes, you've got cabbages, you've got kale, you've got broccoli, garlic, those sort of things. Things that keep you healthy, keep your body running. It's important to balance those high calorie crops. The high calorie crops will keep you running, but you want to be running as smoothly as possible, so you add in nutrition next. After that, play around. Put in your purple carrots, whatever you want. If you're not trying to survive on your garden necessarily this year, it's always fun to play. I always put in a few crops that I know are just silly. First of all though, I get my calories in the ground. Behind me here, this is a bed of yams. All these stakes, these are for climbing yams, African yams, Dioscorea species, not sweet potatoes. These are not sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are Ipomaea batatas. This is various varieties of Dioscorea, Dioscorea alata, Dioscorea cayennensis. Those are true yams. They are a climbing vine from the tropics that makes a great big root like a potato. These are my potatoes for the tropics. I got these in first. I have not planted the carrots. The tomatoes are just coming up, but I wanted to make sure I had calories in the ground because you never know. If you have a lot of calories in the ground, you have a sense of security that you don't have if you were just growing them snap peas that I always love to grow every year. Okay, well the snap peas are great. You get the calories in the ground first and then get your nutrition going. You can actually get your nutrition from wild greens foraging if you're smart about it, but calories are very hard to get from wild foraging unless you're very lucky and you live in an area with something like a lot of wild duck potatoes or cattails or wild yams. But generally I find it much harder to get calories out of the wild without hunting. And guess what? Everybody's going to be hunting. They're going to be out shooting all the squirrel and the deer, and so make sure you've got them in your ground first. And bonus points if you can plant something that other people don't know very well. Something like ground nut, like the natives used to eat, is unlikely to get stolen from your garden. So just a few thoughts there on what to plant. Now, how do you know what's going to be easy to grow in your area? This is the other thing. You have calories, right? It's no good if you try to grow a big bed of barley, but your climate is not suited to barley. You want to make sure that what you plant is well suited to your climate. The first thing I would do to find out about that is to see what's growing commercially. Find out what calorie crops, staple crops are growing commercially in your area, because capitalism, the invisible hand, will direct you. If people are making money off it in your soil and with your climate, chances are you can grow it in your backyard pretty easily. People have moved all over the country to grow specific crops, and industries have grown up in areas where they fit. So if it fits and there are farmers making money off it in your area, plant it. Generally, the further north you go, the more grains become a staple. The further south you go, the more roots become a staple. Roots are simply a better staple than grains usually, yield-wise, space-wise and processing-wise. Because if you've ever tried to process small grains at home, it's a pain in the neck. I have grown wheat, I've grown barley, I have grown rye, and I don't really want to anymore. I love the way it looks when it's growing, but when it comes out to processing time, I generally cut the heads off and use them for chicken feed because I just don't want to bother with it. If you don't have machine harvesting, it's a pain in the neck. The exception on grains is, for the north, flint corn. Flint corn is easy to grow and easy to process, so I think it makes more sense as a staple further north. Potatoes and Jerusalem artichokes would be some of your temperate survival staples, but Jerusalem artichokes come with the caveat that they will mess your digestion up, and they have some serious digestion issues, so it may be better to grow Jerusalem artichokes, feed them to a pig, and then eat the pig. That's probably the best way to incorporate them. So you're pretty much stuck with potatoes. So enjoy your potatoes. When you get to the tropics, it gets much easier because you have a year-round growing season and you have a wide variety of staples. You have taro and malanga and breadfruit and yams and sweet potatoes. We don't do so well on grains down here, but it doesn't matter. There are so many roots that can be eaten, and that's just counting the roots. When you start looking to the trees, there are a wide variety of tree crops, things like bananas and plantains that can be eaten green and provide you with the carbohydrates you need to get by. Even coconuts, very excellent staple, high in fat, high in nutrition. In a temperate climate though, a good idea is to take a look and see what the natives were growing some hundreds of years ago and duplicate those methods. Don't do the methods that are going on right now and the crops that are going on right now so much as looking and saying what kept people alive in a low-tech society with crops that were actually bred for the climate over hundreds of years of selection under adverse conditions, being watered primarily with rainfall. So think Three Sisters Garden. Before we get into actually building beds and planting, let's talk about the basic tools you'll want. I am a big fan of tilling without gasoline and without electricity if I can help it. And even when I've had a tiller in the past, which I don't anymore, I've tried to use hand tools or to keep hand tools as backups in case you run out of gasoline, you run out of electric, or parts become scarce, whatever else. It's good to know how to till like a third worlder before you actually have to do that and you're trying to do it with some chintzy shovel or piece of junk that you've dug up. Get the good tools now. So I'm gonna run over a few tools and then we're gonna use some of them in the garden to build some beds. First, we have a spade and we have a fork. Unfortunately, this is a modern spade and a modern fork. Even though they were expensive and supposedly well made, they're not made like the old ones. This one will hold up, but this I've already bent a little bit in the ground, which is very irritating because it's supposed to be a solid forged head. They don't make them like they used to. They really don't. Clarington Forge still makes some good stuff, but I've heard that even Clarington Forge is no longer making them in England. They've moved to India. And they assure us that all the quality is the same. Yeah, I don't think so. Anytime somebody moves to some country to make things cheaper, it seems like the quality drops. I don't know, somebody from Clarington Forge can happily get in contact with me and send me a pair and I can tell them whether or not I think they're good, because I have used the old Clarington Forge ones and they're with my parents now. They're fantastic. But if you can, get classic tools. I'm going to show you a classic tool here. See this? Here in the third world, people use and reuse and reuse, and if something is well made, it gets a new lease on life. This is a steel pipe and handle that was made to fit this old head. This is from the colonists, apparently, left this. It was found in one of the fields and the steel was still good. I mean, you can see how worn down it is. The steel was still good, and so one of the local farmers found this, had a friend who could weld, put it together and make it strong, and he put this old head, and he says this is his quick one. This one just likes to work. That's what he told me. And I agree, because I tried it up against this newer one, and this thing works the ground really fast, and this one bounces off the ground. You can tell the square points, it's actually thicker, you know, down towards the end than this one is, but the metal is just not so strong. I mean, even this thinner metal at the end here is not bending. So I'm gonna show you something else along those lines. This is my favorite gardening hoe. This is a vintage hoe that we picked up, my wife and I, when we were on a date. Went on a date, and all right, I'm not gonna make any jokes about hoes, but we found this for 15 bucks in an antique shop. Had the original handle on it, and you can see it's worn down, it's had a lot of use, but the entire assembly is one solid piece of good steel. You don't see them like this anymore. What you see is a little chintzy collar and a little piece that jams in the middle, and you kind of compression fit it on there, and it's got cheap, nasty metal, and it doesn't cut. This head is very light, but very strong. I have replaced the handle on it about 3 times. I think this is a broom handle or something, and this is my wife's favorite hoe for the garden at this point, and it's mine as well. It's unbelievable. And I bought a few more heads on eBay after that and put them aside. If you see them with this kind of an angle on it, where it's made so the handle fits right in, it locks into place, that's what you want. You don't want the little one that goes in and has a collar around it. That's how all the new ones are that I have ever seen. Don't bother with them. If you can get an antique one, go for it. If you can't, well, you use what you have. But, you know, a few bucks at an old barn sale or something, get it, get it. People overlook the good stuff a lot of times. Old tool, I don't want it. Get it. These 3 hoes here are from easydigging.com. I'm friends with the owner, Greg, and he's a fantastic guy, and he's one of those people that really likes good tools. I would say he digs good tools, you know, it makes sense. And so he hunts down really good stuff, and he sources it, and he sells it through easydigging.com. And I have been using these for years now, and I totally like them. This is a grub hoe, or a digging hoe. This stands in for a shovel, but you get the swing of a large handle, so you can chop the ground and cut into the ground. I've used this for transplanting trees, digging ponds. Once you start using it, it's a very natural motion compared to shoveling. Totally love it, and I would get one if I didn't have one already. I might get another one, but this one here, the triangle hoe, this is good for making ridges and furrows, and I've discovered as of this morning that it is really good for digging yam beds. It's very quick through the soil. You put an edge on it, and I always file these edges real sharp and work with them because I like good, sharp, fast-moving tools. I learned that from Steve Solomon, and it saved me a lot of labor. Spend a little bit of time sharpening your tools and you get moving. But this one's real good for quick weeding, quick digging, and it handles soil quickly, but it doesn't move as much as this one, which is called the grape hoe. This was developed originally for vineyards in Italy, and this is a broader hoe. You put a real nice edge on this, and you go along the ground, and you can just clear sod with it all day long. You can also move a lot of soil with it, and locally one of the farmers uses it for digging yam beds and all that kind of thing too, which you can. It's not actually designed necessarily for digging, but it moves a lot of soil real fast and does a good job. Another thing, you don't have to go even to Easy Digging or any kind of new tool site to get digging hoe heads or grub hoe heads like I just showed you. You can go, I got this one off of eBay for a few bucks. You can get these old ones, people hardly know what they are, and they're like shabby chic, you know, hanging on your wall. You know, have it hanging on your wall and put a flower pot under it, forget that. I want to dig with it. So this one is waiting a bit of a cleanup and a sharpening, and it'll be ready to get out in the garden once we put a handle on it. There is a new tool that I really like that is basically indestructible, because if something could be broken, I can break it. I have not been able to break this tool, and I have used it contrary to manufacturer's instructions for, you know, sieges, zombies. You can attach it to the front of your car and run over basically anything. This is a Meadow Creature broad fork. This is a digging tool that breaks really hard ground, and it breaks it down to 14 inches. I've used it in sand, I've used it in clay. In sand, it's really fast. In clay, it's a lot of work to break new clay, but it's still possible. I've broken multiple beds with it. It's kind of heavy, finds its own place, and you just stomp on it and start working it. I really like this tool. This is basically your off-grid tiller. You can do a large space with it, and it will handle some seriously adverse conditions that you just wouldn't want to try even working with a fork. It's a serious tool, and it's very well made, and it's made in the United States, so go USA. Another tool you want, landscape rake. This is important. This helps you shape up beds and clear things, and you know, we don't necessarily think of it until you start gardening how handy one of these is. You find yourself doing all kinds of things. You can even use it for clearing out small weeds when they first show up in a bed. You just rake it over again and it pulls everything out. Make sure you have one of these. If you don't have one, just make one. It's really not that hard to make. You can get some of your wife's hairpins. You can forget it, just buy one. Another tool I love for large garden spaces and for serious weeding is the wheel hoe. This is a Planet Whiz Bang wheel hoe from gardening superstar, inventor of the Whiz Bang chicken plucker, my friend Herrick Kimball. And I bought this one and I have used it now for years. It's got what's called a hula hoe or a scuffle hoe at the bottom of it. A blade goes in the ground, so when you have these pistol grips, you just grab it and you walk down the rows and you weed. And you weed in between so easily and so quickly because all of the energy is directed down that you're just not going to believe it. You can, if you have looser soil, you can basically walk with it and weed a large area. I weeded about something close to 6,000 square feet of corn in just a few minutes with one. Just walk down the rows, walk down the rows, walk down the rows, and it's real nice. Does a very good job. It's much nicer to use than a tiller for weeding, I'll tell you that. Costs about, I think it was like 16 bucks for the wheel, and then you spend $100 for the kit. You can also buy more expensive varieties of the wheel hoe, like Haas makes one, a couple other people make them, but I like this one the best. I've tried some of the other ones and they're more complicated, they have more attachments, but for just straight up weeding, this is ergonomic and it does an excellent job, and it's just one of my favorite garden maintenance tools. When you get over a certain size garden, get over a couple, 2,000 square foot or so, wheel hoe all the way. It's probably cut your time by 5, so maybe 1/5 the time to get it done. Fantastic tool. One last set of tools I always have, machetes. Gotta love machetes. You can use it for a transplanting tool, you can use it for home defense, and you can cut through your tendons really badly and go to the hospital like I did last year. But don't tell anyone. Be prepared. Be cool. Don't do that sort of thing. This type here has the weight towards the end. It's very good for clearing brush, and it's good for chopping things up, getting things done. You can butcher meat with it. This one is originally made for sugar cane. It's called a cane knife. I like this one because you can hook down some vines and chop through them. I also like it for cutting tall grass. You can swoop it right along the ground, kind of like you would a sickle, and it seems to cut really nicely with this straight blade, and it holds a nice edge on it. So just get yourself a machete because it's cool, and you really don't need any more reasons than that. All right, I've talked enough about tools. Let's go dig some beds. Now you saw the bed down the hill. That's my calorie crops. Those are yams. Up here I'm going to put a little bit of nutrition. I've got some parsley transplants to put in, and this little area is very pretty. It looks very nice for parsley. So I'm going to put a little bed right here just as a demonstration. This is going to be very small compared to the kind of space you want to put in for, your calorie crops, but a little bed of parsley is a lot of nutrition in a small space. So the first thing we're going to do, we're on a slope, right? This is not ideal. The soil is good, but location-wise, it's a little slopey. We've got a little bit of shade, which is okay for parsley. I kind of want that, us being in the tropics here. We're gonna get enough sunshine coming over. This is a morning sun location. The sun is setting behind me now, and the sun comes up like this. So morning sun is very important. We're gonna get that good morning sun when it's bright and clear, and sometime afternoon when the sun gets hot, it gets dry out, and it's in the west, we're gonna get shade. It's gonna be perfect for parsley. But because it's on a slope, I know the rain is gonna run down here. So I wanna cut a swale in front of it, and I'll probably put another swale at the bottom of it. To slow the water down, we want it to go around the bed or to seep into the ground and water the bed as it comes down. So I'm gonna cut a swale up here, but first I'm gonna mark off where the bed goes. There's a very high-tech method for doing this. It's called putting rocks on the ground at the four corners. And then we just sort of work up to the rocks. 1, 2, 3, and 4. That looks about right. So first, I'm going to cut this right here. Kind of get my edge a little bit, and I'll dig into this deeper in a minute. I just want to find my line. And then we're going to use some of the loose soil that we dig out of this trench here to make a little bit of cover for the top. We want to follow contour as much as possible so the water runs nicely, and we trap it as it falls. So sometimes you're going to have to curve your beds a little bit to catch the water. You can make an A-frame with a rock, or use a level on a couple of sticks, that sort of thing, to determine where the contour is on your land if you have a slope. If you have flat land, like I mostly gardened it in the past, well, you're in luck. You don't have to worry about it all that much. And you don't have to go digging trenches at the edge of your garden beds. If this grass was any taller here, I would take a string trimmer to it, or a scythe, or a sickle, or whatever else. But I'm not gonna worry about that. It's dry season. We're just gonna start forking. And I'm gonna use this fork that loves the ground that my farmer friend lent to me to get going. There are a lot of rocks in the soil, there's a lot of clay, so this is not particularly easy work. We'll do a piece of it with this fork. Once you break the first little bit, it gets easier. But you gotta open the ground up a bit to let the air in, or else your plants have a hard time getting what they need. If you wanna get real serious, you can double dig the bed, but I don't think that's necessary for parsley. If I was doing a root crop or something going deep, I would want that deep, loose soil, free of rocks. Alternately, we have the broad fork, which takes up huge, beautiful chunks all at once. Look at that. Isn't that awesome? The first one is the hardest. Then you go maybe 6 inches back and you put in another one. But because you loosened the first time, you know, the first cut is the deepest. You try to fork again. You just break that next one and then boom! Look at that. It's not quite as fine a work as using a little tiny fork with the little tiny tines, but man, you can get a lot more done fast. Of course, I've got some big rocks in here, which this ground has not been worked maybe in a long time or ever. So we are starting with virgin ground. We're assuming that maybe the lights go out and you've got a front yard. This is what you do. Hopefully you have a broad fork. This is the only broad fork capable that I know of breaking brand new ground like this. The other ones, the handles will break or the tines bend. This one does not seem to have those problems at all. I've used it over and over and over again, and I love it. It's the only grid down tiller that I'm really totally psyched about. We're not getting quite so deep as we were thanks to the really hard rocks deflecting the tines a bit, but still we're getting as deep as the fork or deeper this first pass. Hear that rock? What's that fingernail on the blackboard sound? Since I'm breaking new ground and I've got a fiddly little vegetable I'm putting in, I'm pulling all this stuff out by hand, but this is really kind of overkill. There's a lot of rocks here, and there's a lot of weeds here, and there's a lot of big roots here, but it's kind of overkill to pick through it like this and do it this way. But since we're doing this video and we're putting things in right away, I'm gonna make sure that this bed looks beautiful. If you had a tiller, you can obviously just chop it up with a tiller, but sometimes with some grasses, when you chop it up with a tiller, each little bit of the grass will grow. That's bad. You really don't want that. I've done that before in Tennessee clay. I don't want to ever do that again. It's about 2 weeks after you plant your beautiful beds, you've got weeds so thick you can barely control them. Yeah, so I'm gonna yank out this grass and get rid of it by hand right now. But if you had more time to plan, you could get yourself some black plastic, or what they call nursery fabric, which is a woven fabric. DeWitt Sunbelt, I think is what the stuff is called, that I used to use in my nursery. And spread that over an area. It lets water through, but it's black. Everything beneath dies from lack of light. And you can lay that over an area and walk away, you know, a few months later, come back and take it off. Everything is dead underneath. Then you just fork up the ground and you're ready to go. That makes a lot of sense to me, and it's not really that expensive. It lasts about 10 years compared to how much time it saves you of fiddly picking out the weeds. So we're gonna make this look beautiful. I could also scrape the top off. Sometimes people will fork the sod under and let it die, but here in the tropics that doesn't work. It's just gonna grow back if I fork it under. So just making sure this looks good, and we can handle pulling the little stuff later.
I'm breaking up the ground with my triangular hoe. Time-lapse footage, now that's just how fast I go, cause I am chopping at the ground, but I'm not tiring hardly. Watch me, garden friends, I'ma dropping some parsley. The earth here is rocky and it's loaded with clay. It'll grow some fine crops and I won't have to pay for leaves from the soil. Fancy vitamin pills, just gotta cut my swales and I'll plant up these hills.
It's a beautiful new morning. We've shaped out this little bed here, and it's time to put some amendments on it. Now, I'm pretty much an organic gardener. There have been times in the past, I confess, that I have thrown 10-10-10 around some of the struggling citrus trees in my old Florida sandy front yard. But I try to avoid that as much as possible, because you never know when those things are going to be cut off from us to use, and also we don't really want to use chemical fertilizers because they're kind of like giving your plants drugs to get them going. They may have the basics to make the plants move and produce, but over time they tend to burn the soil out. So compost, ashes, that's where I tend to stick. I've got 3 amendments here right now. I have got some soil from my chicken run that has compost mixed into it. I go through there and I sift out, actually inside of the chicken coop, and I'm always throwing them food scraps and all kinds of other things to chew on, along with yard waste, leaves that we rake up. I even throw charcoal in there and let them activate that charcoal with all kinds of good stuff. And then I sift it through a little sifter and I use it as a little boost. So it's got chicken manure, it's got some probably bacteria-rich soil, a little bit of biochar, and compost. Here I have some finished compost from a compost pile that I built, and if you ever get a chance, watch some of my videos on building compost piles. I don't build them the complicated way. I put things down, let it rot, and then I come back and harvest. So we've got that right here. And then I have some wood ashes. This provides potassium and calcium, and probably a few other things, but I don't worry about it all that much. Plants like it. That's all we need to know. And it's a traditional amendment. So we're gonna take this and we're just gonna get this going here, stir it in, and then we are going to put out some transplants. And now the ashes. Now we're ready to put in some seeds or some transplants. Today we have transplants, and I'm going to turn it over to my wife and let her put those in.
David's already mentioned 3 fertilizers for your garden. I have another one here. It's a bit scary, so let me just encourage you to stay with me here. In a survival situation, if you wanted to make a compost tea, which is super good for your garden, you may not be able to go down to the pet store and get a fish bubbler, a fish tank bubbler. What's more, you may not have electricity with which to run it. We have a compost tea here that we've been using, and some people might not want to call it a compost tea. They might want to say, okay, that's anaerobic fermented plant juice. So in this barrel, we have weeds and all kinds of organic material that we throw in. Some manure, some urine, Epsom salts, seaweed, and then top it up a bit with some water. And it just sits and it rots. And what happens is that all of the plant material, as it rots down there, so you think about it, all the plants, they grow up and they pull up nutrients from up out of the ground. And if you cut your weeds and you throw them away, you're taking the fertility out of your garden and throwing it away because they pulled it all up. So by composting, yes, and by also making a fermented plant juice like this, you're bringing all of those minerals, those vitamins that your plants, that your weeds have pulled up, and putting them in here, fermenting them down, putting it back on the garden. You're completing the cycle. It's a good thing, and your plants really like it. Now, people will tell you this is really bad and scary and wrong and rotten, and well, it kind of is sort of rotten, but they'll tell you you shouldn't do this. But really, it works so nicely, and there's just no problem with it. I don't really know why people don't like it. Anyhow, you just dilute it. Put some, maybe a 6-to-8 ratio. It's not rocket science. Put some in a watering can, fill the rest with water, water your garden with it. One of the benefits of using compost tea or fermented weed juice like we're using is that you can stretch the fertility on a large garden. You may not be able to make compost, enough compost for a really big survival garden, but you can use this compost tea to fertilize a huge garden space.
Now Rachel has transplanted and watered these in with some awesome anaerobic compost tea. But we're only doing this little bed for demonstration purposes here. Obviously, if you're doing a survival garden, you want to start going bigger. You saw my yam bed down the hill. That's the way you want to start putting calories in the ground. And I am still digging beds. We just came out of the dry season here. We had over a month of no serious rain. I mean, we're talking like a dusting sprinkle a couple of times. And so this is not really the best time to be digging these beds. The ground is still dry and a bit hard. You want to make sure you work the ground at the best time of the year in your climate. And if you did a bed like this, just do one of these a day for a few weeks, 30 days. If you did one of these every day, it takes about maybe 45 minutes to make a bed like this. Less if the ground wasn't so hard and you weren't working with all the roots and rocks that we had here. So take a piece every single day, put some in. This is going to make a significant amount of parsley. Parsley, the top survival crop.
You never knew, did you?
You never knew.
Now you know. That's worth the whole thing right there.
Right there. Parsley, the #1 calories and nutrition. Now, my dad said to eat parsley because it was the best thing on the plate. He says, don't throw that away. That's the best for you. Well, it really is excellent for you. This is a high nutrient crop, but this is not, you're not going to survive on parsley. And if you tried, you probably wish you died. But anyhow, you do a bed like this every single day. You get out in the afternoon, you put one in, or you do 5 a week and you take the weekend off. After you dig your first few, it gets easier and easier and easier. You just keep little chunk, little chunk, a little chunk, a little chunk, fertilize it, plant some stuff, fertilize it, plant some stuff. Just keep putting things in as the seasons progress and as you have crops that are appropriate to each season. And you're going to be harvesting probably from the first one by the time you get to the end of the month if you planted some greens or something in it. So just keep going, keep pushing, keep putting something in every day. You don't have to go out one weekend and put in 5,000 square foot of beds. That way lies madness. My wife and I often put in a 4x4 or a 4x8, and we do it multiple times in a row at the beginning of the spring, and just put in a bed every day. You get a nice little beautiful bed like this and you go, I have a bit of satisfaction, I got a little bed in. Now I'll put a bed right there, and I can put a bed right here, and I can put beds up behind the camera where you can't see. There's a big old strip of grass. Just keep putting it in, chunk, 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 chunk. Next thing you know, you've got some serious growing going on, and you've had your hands on the ground, and you make sure that those roots and those rocks are out of each little section, and you're just modularly building your survival gardens.
Yeah, particularly if you're a person that gets overwhelmed easily like I do, and you see a big space, you think, I don't know where to start. I can't, that's too much, it's too big, I forget it, I can't even do it. Well, break it into smaller pieces. You can handle that, trust me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're more likely to succeed if you take on little pieces and work from little pieces. This is why the square foot gardening idea totally took off. 4 foot by 4 foot, I can handle that. Start with a few small beds, work up your confidence, keep adding them in. And I recommend just digging your beds right in the ground. Don't bother putting borders around them and cedar or block or whatever. You don't need all that stuff. Farmers never did that for a long, 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 long time until recently we've gotten into this little bio-intensive gardening and, very, very small spaces. Though actually I have to say the bio-intensive people often just dig a bed like this. But, intensive gardening in your backyard with little tiny beds, forget that. Give it a little wider spacing, dig right into the ground you have, and hoe the edges to make sure the weeds don't come into the center. It's simple, and it doesn't cost you anything, and you're not sitting there waiting, you know, to get the right materials and build, or waiting for your husband to build it for you. You just start digging, make it happen. Thanks for joining me. I hope you learned a few things. If you've got questions, you can always go to my website, thesurvivalgardener.com, and drop me an email or leave a comment there. I post every single day of the week, and there's something like 1,300 plus articles on there, all kinds of things related to plants, foraging, survival gardening, homesteading, chickens, a lot of details, and I have talked to some very intelligent people, and there are some great people over there that leave some excellent comments as well. So it's a good community, and I hope to see you over there. I also want you to check out my YouTube channel. Just look for David the Good on YouTube. It is a pretty big YouTube channel now. I mean, surprisingly big considering how many jokes I throw into the channel. Hey, we're survival gardening today. It's time to throw in a hip hop track. You know, that kind of thing? Anyhow, make sure that you're learning to garden right now. Don't start doing this tomorrow. Don't start thinking, I'm gonna get some tools next week, next month, whenever. It's important to be prepared, to have what you need on hand, to start composting, to start digging, to put those tools aside. I put extra tools aside. In case things get bad, I want my neighbors to also be able to garden. I want you to think that way. And you're not gonna have that kind of anxiety at night of, what happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? Put a few thousand pounds of calories in the ground, and there's a peace of mind there comparable to paying off your house. It's a nice feeling to think I can go out at any time and I can dig up some stuff and my family's gonna be all right. I want you to have that, and again, if you have any questions, come over to thesurvivalgardener.com, drop me an email anytime. Thanks for watching, and until next time, may your thumbs always be green.